John Turner. I'm the Democratic Services Officer for this meeting, and I'm assisted by my colleague Kate Sheldon, who is the host of the meeting. Thank you very much for logging on to this Zoom video conference meeting of the Economic and Environmental Wellbeing Scrutiny and Policy Development Committee. The meeting is a public meeting and, in alignment with the new regulations which permit meetings to be held by remote means, will be live streamed for the public to view. Part of the housekeeping rules, if people want to speak, could they indicate via the chat facility to the chair, Councillor Denise Fox. Otherwise, if you could keep yourselves on mute, please. Just one final thing, mainly for members of the public, you may see members or officers in attendance looking to the left and right of the screens. They're not being distracted in any way, they're merely looking at other devices. I'll now hand you over to the chair of the meeting, Councillor Denise Fox.
Thank you, John. Welcome everybody, and welcome to the representatives from the transport. I'll just go around the screen and get everybody to introduce themselves. First on my screen is Kate.
Hello, I'm Kate Sheldon, Member Support and Civic Manager for Sheffield City Council.
John's already introduced himself. Councillor Maroof.
Councillor Mohammed Maroof, Crooks and Crosspool, Lib Dem.
Thank you. Deborah.
Thank you, Chair. Deborah Glenn. I'm the Policy and Improvement Officer supporting this committee.
Thank you. Councillor Law.
Alan Law, Firth Park.
Thank you. Councillor Masters.
Barbara Masters, Councillor for Ecclesfield.
Thank you. Nigel, you're next on my screen.
Nigel Eggleton, Managing Director, First in South Yorkshire and the Midlands.
Thank you, Nigel. Councillor Hooper.
Yeah, Councillor Anne Hooper, Councillor for West Ecclesfield.
Thank you. Councillor Smith.
Martin Smith, Councillor for Durham Totley.
Thank you. Phil Medicott.
Yeah, Phil Medlicott, Managing Director for Stagecoach in South Yorkshire.
Thank you. Councillor Turpin.
Paul Turpin, Green Councillor for Gleadless Valley.
Thank you. John. You.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. John Young, I'm the Commercial Director for Stagecoach in Yorkshire.
Thank you. Councillor Hurst.
Yes, thank you, Chair. My name's Diane Hurst. I'm a councillor for Richmond Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Calhoun.
Good evening, everybody. Abdul Young, Councillor for Firth Park Ward.
Thank you. Matthew.
Thank you, Chair. Matthew Reynolds, Transport Planning and Infrastructure Manager at Sheffield Council.
Thank you. Councillor Auckland.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening. Councillor Ian Auckland at Graves Park Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Richards.
Councillor Sioned Meyer Richards, Labour Member for Manor and Castle Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Lodge.
Yeah, Councillor Brian Lodge, Member for Burley Ward.
Thank you, everyone, and welcome, everybody. Do we have any apologies for absence, John?
Yes, Chair, I've had two apologies, one from Councillor Moya O'Rourke and another from Councillor Neil Gibson, and Councillor Alan Law is subbing for Councillor Gibson.
Thank you. Item 3, we don't have any exclusion of press or public today. So do we have, in item 4, do we have any declarations of interest? I can't see anybody indicating, so I take that as a no. Okay, so we now move on to the main topic of discussion, which is item 6, which is the impact of the pandemic on bus services in Sheffield. I understand that you all want to give a few minutes introduction to yourself and what's been happening with your area. I would like to start.
Yeah, I'll start if that's okay.
Thank you, Phil.
No problem. Yeah, I mean, I'll give a brief sort of talk through on the processes that we went through. Just so you're aware, obviously I've asked John to sort of join me today So if later on there's any sort of detailed specific questions on routes or networks or timings or when things historically changed, he's the man, and I'll sort of steer towards him to answer those questions. I guess when all of this started back in March, sort of none of us were obviously expecting this initial lockdown. So we were all sort of learning, and I accept maybe we made some mistakes in those very early stages. As a number of you will be aware, we reduced our service levels in accordance with government guidelines, sort of taking into account the requirements set out to operate both efficiently and effectively, working with the local authority. So in this case, obviously South Yorkshire. We worked with our colleagues at South Yorkshire PTE, in fact, very, very closely, to ensure that each area that we operated in had some level of service, taking into account the sort of pre-COVID levels, but with reduced levels of frequency. Our operation reduced to around about 40% during April and May, and then sort of increased as the year went on, up to around about 75% in sort of June, 85% in July, 90% in August, and then obviously a full 100% operation as the schools went back in September. Our passenger numbers followed sort of similar-ish patterns to some extent, apart from initially they went down to just under 20%. And then they slowly started to increase up to around about 30% during June, creeping up to about 40% by the end of July, 50% by early August, and we reached a peak of around about 55% when the school services went back in September. And they remained at that sort of level until the most recent lockdown, when the numbers reduced back down to about 40%. However, coming out of that, they've sort of returned to the sort of the low 50s, really. So we're around about 50% at this moment in time. And during this second lockdown, obviously we've remained at 100% of our service level. Throughout this sort of period, we had sort of two variants that really affected us quite badly, which was to do with social distancing on buses. So the first was obviously the 2-metre rule, which was slightly relaxed for public transport, in particular buses, to 1.8 metres. And the reason for that really is to do with the design of the actual vehicles themselves. So in the early stages, that meant capacities only allowed about 20% of the pre-COVID levels on the actual vehicles themselves. Following the relaxation which we had through the summer, when they introduced obviously compulsory mask wearing on public transport, and they allowed that reduction to go just under 1 metre. And again, that's because of the design of the actual vehicle themselves, which actually gives us around about maximum 40% capacity of the actual vehicle itself. So unless this rule at some point changes, we can't actually physically carry more than about 55 to 60% of our pre-COVID levels on the vehicles. And so sort of central and local government funding will actually be sort of required to continue for the foreseeable future. I mean, I don't know when this will change. I don't think anyone does, to be honest. But I anticipate that won't happen until the vaccine is more than likely being widely distributed, which I guess will be sort of spring or summer of next. We obviously, as a company, use the shielding scheme that was available for our staff. We had approximately 4%, so a relatively small number of staff that were required to shield. But we did use the furlough scheme quite significantly, which we were furloughing sort of 55 to 60% of our workforce throughout sort of March. So I was into September, but as those staff obviously started to return, we obviously brought them all back. So by the time we'd hit September and the schools were back, every one of our staff were back in work. Subsequently, in this second lockdown, we've had a much smaller number of people that have gone through the CEV, so the clinically extremely vulnerable scheme. So there's only about 2% of our workforce, and those staff have been furloughed. But again, all of those staff have now actually returned as well. But to be honest with you, it's been extremely challenging times for the staff, both for the staff in the offices and obviously the drivers themselves. I mean, they've worked pretty tirelessly, I would suggest, to deliver the best service we possibly can under the circumstances. We've not lost any mileage whatsoever due to either lack of staff or vehicles throughout the whole process. And as I'm sure most of you have seen in the press, we've introduced sort of new, better cleaning regimes, etc. And actually, we've employed some additional staff to be able to do that. So we've not actually lost any of our frontline workers throughout this whole process. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a flavour. I can talk about the bus reform, or I can leave that till a bit later if you'd prefer. But that's roughly what Stagecoach has done throughout this last 9 months or so.
Thank you, Phil. Does John, do you want to add anything to that, or?
No, not at this stage. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Nigel, would you like to come in now?
Yes, thank you, Chair. And I would like to echo everything that Phil has said. The Stagecoach's experience has been remarkably similar to ours in First, and indeed remarkably similar to what the rest of the country is seeing as well, because we do chat frequently to other First subsidiaries, and what's going on in South Yorkshire is certainly typical. The funding is perhaps worth a little more explanation, and we are funded by central government up to a break-even point. We are not permitted currently to make a profit, nor are we allowed to increase fares or reduce fares. And there is that overriding requirement to operate as efficiently as possible, and that is entirely reasonable. There's also funding from the Department of Education, and that is dedicated to provide additional resource for the purposes of carrying school children. There was a great deal of nervousness in government late July and August about the ability of public transport to carry school children. In practice, that's worked remarkably well. And remarkably well, I would suggest, because we've worked very closely with the local authorities and South Yorkshire PTE to understand those school movements. There have been a number of occasions where we've left passengers behind because social distancing has prohibited us from carrying the necessary number of passengers, but thankfully those are very rare, and that funding from the Department of Education and sometimes from the Department of Transport has enabled a small amount of additional capacity to be brought into the network. We've suffered, and we don't really understand why, a slightly greater level of vandalism on board our vehicles as well. We suspect in some way it's COVID related, although the psychology of that escapes me directly, but it's certainly greater this autumn than it was last autumn, although yours truly wasn't around in South Yorkshire last autumn. But South Yorkshire Police have been helpful, and indeed thanks to many of the councillors on the call today for using their influence to deal with that. So now we look to the future, and when we get out of this, funding is guaranteed from government until the springtime. We will be given 8 weeks notice of the removal of that funding. Those around the country who have some expertise in modelling are saying to us at the moment, it is likely we'll return to something in the region of 80% of the passenger numbers that were there pre-COVID within 12 months. So that is inevitably going to mean some difficult decisions about the size and shape of the network going into the next 12 to 24 months if the funding disappears and we lose 20% of our passenger base. But we're probably in a half full sort of mood, because bus is equally as important to the city and to the environment as it ever was, and we will be doing all sorts of things to attract our customers back to bus when it's appropriate to do so. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Nigel. I'll open it up for questions now, and then if you don't mind, Phil, we'll come back to you on the reform if that's okay with you. We've got already a couple of members indicated. Councillor Maroof, would you like to ask your question?
Thank you, Chair. It's quite a straightforward question, really. There's been a number of parents who have been extremely concerned about school buses in particular, and I know Nigel's just touched on that subject. And their concern seems to be that these buses are rather overcrowded, and there's not a great deal of social distancing happening on the buses. And my concerns and the concerns of the parents are that with that in mind, and secondary school children predicted to be the next highest rate of infections, is that not going to cause us a problem? It might not be even your area, it might be specialist buses for all I know. But
no, it is
that
our
not going to be
area.
an issue?
No, I mean,
especially in the new year.
Sorry, there are two sets of rules that the government have introduced. There is the normal public service rules, which obviously require social distancing. They're the ones we were talking about earlier on. There are then some special rules for what are deemed to be closed door school contracts. They are usually for a single school with a single vehicle on them. They've been independently either tendered or we've agreed with South Yorkshire PTE to convert some of our commercial journeys to dedicated school buses. So on those situations, there is no need for social distancing. So we're just currently following government guidelines. There is a requirement that at the right age, they're obviously required to wear masks. And obviously they're meant to be policed by the actual school themselves. And I'm policed insofar as constantly reminding them of their requirements to wear masks. I don't believe there's any that are actually what you might call overloading. So not legally overloading anyway. They might seem fuller than the normal buses that we obviously see out there at the moment, but clearly there's no problem with us operating.
No, like I said right at the beginning of my question, this is the concerns that were brought to me by parents, obviously not realising that there might be specialist buses laid on for schools, but just on normal buses, when secondary school pupils get on, presumably they still have to abide by the social distancing rules, I would imagine.
They do. The drivers count them on when they hit the required number on that particular vehicle. We changed the blind to bus full. Nigel covered that a few minutes ago by talking about passengers who are left behind. When we say left behind, they can't catch that actual bus, which means they have to catch the next one that's behind. And yes, that's a daily process that we don't overload, obviously, on normal service buses.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Do you want to add anything to that, Nigel?
No, Phil's covered that subject very well. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Next question from Councillor Auckland.
Thank you, Chair. Hang on, I've come off mute. I don't seem to be moving. That picture. Don't know how that's come about. Hopefully you can hear me. So members have heard me before say of the opinion the answer to most urban transport problems in a big city is a bus, increasingly low emission, zero emission at the tailpipe. So the situation we're in is rather tricky because you're going to have fewer passengers, and yet we still need people to make the bus more often their choice for getting around. So I'm just wondering what you've done to model how things might work with the network as we come out of COVID, and what things you're thinking about doing that would increase customer passenger confidence in the bus service. And the sort of things I've talked about in the past is like service guarantees, get your own guarantees, individual route performance information on the buses, because if you're waiting for a bus and it doesn't turn up, it's 100% failure for you, even if the service is 99.7% reliable. So basically more confidence, how you can build confidence in the service. What more could be done with technology that tells you when the bus is going to arrive, what things you might want to say about possibly what the council isn't doing to help you get through traffic and congestion. Yeah, what sort of things do you think you need to be thinking about to rebuild passenger confidence? And what sort of thinking have you been given to how the network might shape up if you're going to only be at 80%?
Yeah.
Sorry, one final thing, and particularly if service frequencies, I mean, reliability is important and service frequency is important. But if you can't have the same service frequency without substantial government funding, you've got to have, you know, reliability, haven't you? It's going to be a lot of things there, but there you go. Thank you, Chair.
Should I kick off with that one, Chair? Yes,
yes, please.
Thank you, Councillor Auckland. That's a very well put description of what we need to achieve in the future. And I think it goes without saying that if we are to attract our customers back to bus, which for the reasons you've outlined is so important, the quality of that product, the quality of service needs to be better than it ever has been before. And I'm sure we'll talk about what the South Yorkshire Bus Review can bring to that party in a little while. So we look at the network first of all, and the modelling that I referred to earlier appears to indicate that within the next 12 months we'll be at around 80%. And that gives us a number of different options. There will be those services and corridors where a small frequency reduction may be appropriate. There'll be other more marginal services which will, possibly for the first time, require external funding in some way. And although we mentioned that DfT are funding us at the moment, the mood music coming out of DfT more recently hasn't been as positive as perhaps it once was. And you can understand that sentiment given the national debt and the inability to afford everything. But nor can I believe that central government will allow a major contraction in the bus network. That's not what any of us want. I genuinely don't think that that will happen. But the means by which that funding is distributed may well change. And there's all sorts of discussions going on between bus industry and DfT at the moment to see what might be possible. And we look forward to the National Bus Strategy being revealed in January and February. And as a precursor to that, there was some discussion before we went into the most recent lockdown about a funding pot in the region of 300 million to enable bus service to continue in some way. So a lot to be had there, a lot of discussion to be had. Every cloud has a silver lining. We are seeing punctuality and reliability statistics currently and through the lockdown that we would have dreamed of last year. And we want to do everything possible to retain that benefit that all our passengers have had, and technology is one of the ingredients that enables us to do that. We know where every bus is now. We can provide via our app and the Stagecoach app and the various methods of information provision that the PTE provide, all that information that is so critical to providing the right level of confidence to our customers to travel by bus when they want to take them where they need to be. So all sorts of technology there. We hear that there's likely to be a national marketing campaign as well. I don't know much about the ingredients of that as yet, but that's something that's likely to take place, and quite happy to distribute all those details to councillors and others when we know more about it. Now, Phil and John, I'm sure there's things I've missed there.
Not a lot. I mean, we've obviously done similar things to First on various different sort of modelling scenarios, the sort of the what if. I I guess the problem is we just don't know the true answer until we see, you know, passenger numbers coming back. All I would say is that a large proportion of our services, we believe, no matter what happens. So if it is 80%, there will still be a large swathe of commercial services within the Sheffield City region. So we don't see sort of significant amounts of disruption going forward. But clearly the services that were on the margin before will clearly drop into sort of needing support going forward. But I can't particularly see any significant reasons as to why we can't work with yourselves, with South Yorkshire PTE, to be able to achieve most, if not all, of the current network as it stands today, to be perfectly honest with you. We believe that, you know, promoting public transport is the way forward. The last thing we want is more cars on the road because of the congestion and all of the issues that entails. You know, we've invested significant amounts of money, and actually so have yourselves via the various sort of CAS funds to improve the air quality of the particular vehicles that we're operating out there. We spent millions of pounds on upgrading these vehicles. So it would seem foolish and a shame now to obviously see that go to waste. So they're very, very much on the same lines as Nigel, really. We don't see a significant issue. We do think that there are areas that we can, you know, use from the information that's come from the bus reform, and I said I'll cover a little bit of that later on. But there are some good ideas in there. This is not all bad news within the bus reform. It's been a good opportunity to listen to some of our customers, but obviously they were customers pre-COVID and pre this situation, and we just need to bear in mind where we are today, to be honest with you. Lots of technology out there, as we know, contactless, various ticketing, you know, sort of examples that we can see coming on stream. And yes, quite a lot of technology for people with apps and websites and real-time information, a whole string of other things that I would hope we'll be able to sort of push forward as we move on. Hopefully that's sufficient.
Sorry, Chair, can I come in on that as well, please?
Yes, absolutely, Matthew.
Okay. Thanks, Chair. Yeah, so I think just one thing which I'd like to say is that the city completely understands the impact of COVID-19 on the public transport network. It's not just the buses, but it's the trams, it's the trains as well. It's the whole shebang. We've seen patronage significantly decline. One part of that is the reduced need to travel. So trying to understand what that is later is one of the key things, and actually how people's behavioural change respond as a result of COVID-19. So that's something which we need to factor into our assessments as well. People's perception, you know, we've touched on the hygiene elements to it. I don't think people quite realise how much effort's gone in from the bus operators to make sure that the buses are clean and tidy. So it's almost a public advertising campaign, really, more than anything else, to try and put some of those negative thoughts to bed and actually sort of set around some of those potentially wrong theories of what's going on the buses in terms of hygiene. But the other thing is there's been the enforced capacity, and that, as long as they're in place, it's always going to have an impact on how bus services operate. And until that results or sort of, you know, rectifies itself, the results will be quite clear to see. I think the other thing is that this is not a situation specific to Sheffield. This is happening not only across the north, but across the nation and across the world in many circumstances. So where possible, from the sort of public sector perspective, I'm sure First and Stagecoach are doing the same thing. We're looking to see where best practice is being placed elsewhere. So the Urban Transport Group is one example. First, Stagecoach will have divisions on a multinational basis, so we'll be able to look to see what best practice is applying elsewhere. That will then make its way back to South Yorkshire and Sheffield, and we'll start to see how we can sort of take some of that learning and sort of apply it on a more localized basis. I think in terms of how our response would be, which is mainly around the infrastructure, is that we need to build in sort of contingencies as to what might happen. So a little bit of optioneering and future gazing as to what might happen, theorising in many respects. But we'll never forget the value that mass transit brings to the city, in not only its process around economic recovery, but also around the environmental benefit, but also the huge, massive social implication which it brings, and a lot of the benefits it does in terms of connecting people with people. There's that sort of bit which makes human society work. And one thing which I've sort of been routinely saying since March is that actually throughout the recovery stage of COVID-19, an effective and efficient bus network is absolutely paramount to our sustainable economic growth, but most importantly, it builds inclusivity into how we want to develop as a city. So Councillor Auckland, completely take your points on board. That is exactly the fundamental cornerstone of what we're trying to do. In terms of First and Stagecoach have picked up on this. The last thing we want is go from lockdown to gridlock. That is absolutely the worst case scenario. If people decide that they're going to ditch the bus and buy a little Toyota Aygo and a second car or whatever, that is bad news for everybody. That is not the way we want to go. So keeping the viability and the attractiveness of public transport is going to be absolutely key to maintaining congestion at level which is bearable. Let's be honest. I think the way in which we're looking to do that, we've got a programme of works. A lot of you on the call I've spoken to already about the Connecting Sheffield. This is an infrastructure package of £50 million. It's not only around public transport, it's around active travel as well, but it's providing those travel choices. And with schemes promoted throughout that programme of work, we're trying to lock in some of those operational benefits which Nigel talked about around punctuality, about reliability, by providing bus priority along some of those corridors, and particularly within the city centre itself. Technology, I think, plays a key role, absolutely, and that's something which we're looking to sort of implement as part of that capital works. Looking to see how we can improve bus stops, what information is provided there, try to give users a full understanding of all the sort of bits of information they need to know prior to and during making the journey. So I think just to sort of wrap it up, we've been working tirelessly with the PTE, with the bus operators, and I want to put on record that they've done a brilliant job. We've done a lot of resilience work to try and make sure that this has worked as best as we possibly can. The education, the stops pulled out to make sure all the kids could get to school was a huge piece of work done under completely continuously changing circumstances as government guidance changed from one day to the next. Start dates, as you know, were moved and muted and changed. So it's it got quite tricky, and we were desperately under all of this COVID response. It's been deadline after deadline after deadline, and they've been really short. So yeah, I think I'll just finish on that point. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Matthew. Ian, is that anything to add, or have you asked?
Yeah,
you need to.
I seem to be moving again now, Chair. So I'd like to make a comment at some point when we get along.
Okay, thank you. Next question from Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just start by putting on record my thanks to everybody at First Stagecoach, the council, everybody that's been keeping the bus services running in a safe way. It's much appreciated in all parts of the city. So a big thank you. But having said that, I'm actually really concerned by what we just heard. Like the rest of the country, the vaccine's coming. It's just begun to come through. We all need a bit of hope for next year. And it sounds, to summarise what I've just heard, central government funding is likely to run out at about 8 weeks' notice, but it's going to take a year for bus passenger numbers to get up to something like about 80% of where they were. So there's a financial hole that needs to be resolved. How likely is it that some of the reductions in service intervals and network cuts are going to take place next year? to put it bluntly. How likely do you think those are going to happen? And my second question is probably directed at Matthew, which is around the specific actions that the council are going to take. I accept, and again, thank you for the general description you just gave. But what if we're going to hit a problem, say the middle of next year? What are the specific infrastructure changes that are going to take place that's under the council's control by the middle of next year to help improve the situation? I think I'll probably just leave it at that, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin.
Would you like us to answer that, or are you going to ask the other questions first? Chair?
Sorry, Chair. Sorry, Phil.
Would you like us to answer that specific question, or?
Yeah. Yes, please. Yeah.
I mean, the question of how likely are the service cuts versus the funding is, of course, the unknown. I mean, what I said earlier on is I don't particularly foresee a significant reduction in services that we will be operating within the Sheffield. You know, most of our services were commercial before we sort of went into the sort of this pandemic, and I anticipate most of them will be commercial when we come back out, even with 80% passenger loadings. I guess what the possibility is that instead of having a bus every 6 minutes, yes, it might be every 8 or 9 or something slightly different. But I cannot particularly foresee any areas not being covered that we currently cover between ourselves first and any other operator. Clearly, some of that will come down to then the borderline services, and yes, there will clearly need to be a funding pot somewhere down the line. And I would hope that within the PTE or the local authorities or central government that clearly will be made available for a long enough period of time for the passengers to reach.
Thank you.
Yes, if I may, Chair, I'll just add a little bit there. We've got a dilemma to deal with to an extent, in that we hope that in due course, although none of us can predict when, we'll get back to 100% or even more than that. And assuming that's to be the case, the very last thing we would want to do would be to, for example, make drivers redundant or remove vehicles, only to have to bring them back to work again in 6, 12, 18 months' time. So we've got that balance to strike. And I don't think, despite a little bit of pessimism coming out of DfT at the moment, they will turn the tap off of funding completely. There still has to be some funding to enable public transport across the UK to survive. It's worth mentioning as well that the funding that's going into bus across the country is mere peanuts compared to what's going into rail. And we could probably debate that for the rest of the evening as well. But there we are. So we're still very half full rather than half empty.
Thank you, Nigel. Do you want to add anything, Matthew?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'll just answer that the second point of Councillor Smith's question. So, in terms of the capital works which we're delivering, there'll be the continued implementation of the capital programme, which is the small scale works on the bus network, well, on the highway network. Some of it is related to bus, so it's the hotspots things. In terms of the Connecting Sheffield stuff, these are major infrastructure projects, and they can't just be designed overnight. They require huge amounts of survey work, topographical stuff to make sure you got all your levels right. There's electric cables to move, which doesn't happen overnight, especially in COVID, where resource across the board has been reduced. So the working timescale for Connecting Sheffield, Transforming Cities Fund, is March 2023, because obviously it's a big lot of work and it takes a long time to design and build these things. In terms of things to be delivered by next year, the answer to that question is it will be the stuff we've got down in our capital programme, which won't be the big transformational stuff. That if more funding becomes available and government do allow us to sort of respond quickly to various different things, then we can look to see how new funding becomes available to us. We've had the Active Travel Fund recently that was focused around cycling and walking improvements. So again, it's not necessarily public transport, but it's all about providing alternative forms of transport to the private car to release that, you know, the gridlock to the lockdown after the gridlock after lockdown scenario I explained before. It's a mouthful, that one, isn't it? I'm trying to put my teeth in. But I think it's one of those things where we just have to keep looking. If we find there's particular issues somewhere, then we'll look to respond, and if there's anything we can do, then we'll try and do it. We can always play around with traffic signals and set priorities and things like that where the technology exists. So we do that on almost a traffic management perspective. That happens behind the scenes without sort of big fancy pound signs. It's someone in one of the control rooms flicking switches. So we do what we can within the available resources.
Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. Councillor Turpin.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to Nigel, Phil, John and Matthew for coming to speak to us. I did have a few questions, but we've pretty much mostly answered them as we've gone along. Something I wanted to ask about was how are we ensuring, or how are you ensuring the safety on the buses? And I'm thinking about that horrific incident in France that happened in the spring where a bus driver was fatally attacked for trying to tell people to wear their masks. So I just wondered how you're tackling the problem of ensuring the safety of the passengers and the enforcement of the rules or something, whilst also ensuring the safety of the drivers.
Yeah, it's a subject that has been subject to, as you might imagine, continuous debate between ourselves and our drivers. There is contradiction, perhaps, in law, in that face masks should be enforced on board our vehicles, but our drivers don't have the ability to enforce, and nor should they. To enforce absolutely would result in confrontation, and they don't come to work to deal with that. That would be quite wrong. If they did, sooner or later, somebody's going to get thumped, and that's not what it's about. Now, we've had a mixed response across the country from the local police constabularies. Some have been proactive, some have been the opposite. South Yorkshire is probably on the slightly better side, and we understand absolutely that they haven't got unlimited resource either to come out to any bus that's found with a passenger not wearing a face mask. I think at the moment we're about 95–96% of passengers are compliant, somewhere in that region. It does vary by demographic, almost inevitably, but the level of confrontation has been minimal, and I think we're quite grateful for that, but it does need constant attention, no doubt about that.
Yeah, and it's very similar with Stagecoach, of course, is the rule is compulsory mask wearing on vehicles from a government perspective, but clearly our drivers don't actually police that particular action. The instruction that we give our drivers is to ask and remind people to wear masks when boarding if they don't have one. Generally, if they don't have one, they usually have an exemption. To be honest, we've had very, very few problems where there's been any sort of conflict at all. And obviously, we've got our staff who are in direct connection with our controllers and our teams in the offices. And yes, we've had a reasonable response. Where we have had issues from the sort of travel safe team and the police in Sheffield. Fortunately, we've had no particular issues, but clearly it's always on the back of our mind.
Okay.
Thank you.
And I know that you have alluded to it before, but I just wanted to ask, what has the lockdown done to any plans that you had to upgrade the fleet to, newer, cleaner vehicles?
Yeah, I mean, as far as direct fleet replacements, the vehicles that we had ordered that were due to arrive this year That order was cancelled very early on when this first happened. The current Stagecoach position generally as far as replacing vehicles is we will more than likely place a small capital order this year. And then obviously as the business moves back into profitability, we'll start to reinvest as we have done in previous years. There is a fund from to actually upgrade the vehicles as far as the clean air zones. And obviously we've spent, well, not just us, but obviously with central government and with Sheffield, we've spent significant amounts of money. I think the most recent one is for 85 vehicles at around about £1.5 million. So there is still quite significant levels of investment going into the fleet. It's just not going on brand new vehicles, it's going on upgrading the existing one.
Just to add to that, Councillor Turpin, Sheffield's been successful in the Clean Bus Technology Fund, so we've still continued to roll that programme out, and Stagecoach and First are beneficiaries of that. In terms of the clean air zone, again, it goes back to that modelling and understanding what's going to happen post-COVID. So we're sort of through the business case process and the mitigation, which would include things like the retrofit technologies, etc., to the buses. We're going through with Jacko, the Joint Air Quality Unit, to understand what what mitigation is required in light of the new world post-COVID. So there's quite a lot of analytical work going in around the assumptions of that. So just for a bit of clarity, I thought it's worthwhile just mentioning.
Okay, thanks very much. I don't have anything else to ask, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Richards?
Thank you. It's again, I think, a question about your workforce during the time of COVID, because I know that in the council we have found there have been certain cohorts who are older and have therefore either had to be shielding, is that the word? What's the word we use? Or everybody's nodding at me here, or having to being careful or being more prone to getting COVID, and so we've found that certain services more than others have been slightly depleted or less able to function during this time. So I wanted to ask about the profile of your own workforce, I suppose particularly the drivers, and whether COVID's had that same effect, and whether some workforce development plans will have to change because of that if we're going to continue to live in a time of COVID, because despite the vaccine, we know it is going to sort of carry on for some time, that we'll be living with masks and distancing and all the rest of it. Thank you.
Yeah. I did answer the question. Sorry, in my sort of the initial discussion, I did sort of give you the numbers and the stats. During the first part of the lockdown for Stagecoach Jenny, it was 4%. 4% is 40 members of staff that actually were shielding. Obviously, they changed the shielding word to CEV, or clinically extremely vulnerable, as it's now called. And that was 20 members of staff, so it was actually half what it was originally. All of those members of staff have returned to work, so we don't have any coverage issues whatsoever, and we didn't have any coverage issues at all throughout the whole process of the last 9 months.
Yeah, I would echo that, Councillor. Today we've got 6 drivers and 2 engineers away from work with COVID, and a total of 13 self-isolating for various reasons. We did have a spike in Sheffield 4 weeks ago, but it didn't cause any coverage problems. That was dealt with by overtime and bringing some colleagues across from Doncaster. Worth mentioning, perhaps, one of the things we have done is closed all our staff canteens because there was a risk there of transmission. So you do the safe thing and remove that risk.
Thank you, Nigel. Councillor Richards? Okay. The next questioner is Councillor Lodge.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's just to repeat what everybody else has been saying of the work that's gone on in keeping the city moving. I think is really appreciated by everybody across the city, and I think, you know, I'd make the recommendation later on that we all formally as a board put that on the record, that we recognise the work that's been done by all the staff that's out there. But it's a question looking beyond where we are and looking to the future of things and coming into the post-COVID world of things where they start to go back. And yeah, I understand clearly there's going to be commercial considerations around a lot of routes and a lot of the services and the service frequencies. But I suppose it's looking at things where, as local councillors, we will all, without fail, get people coming to us when there are changes to any bus service. You know, you can guarantee it. It doesn't matter whether you increase the frequency, reduce the frequency, change the route, just whatever it is, people will come to the councillors. And so it's part of that looking at things and thinking, try and look ahead. It's understandable that you can reduce frequencies and it changes a few minutes. And as you know, Phil was saying, maybe dropping from 6 minutes to 8 minutes to 10 minutes. That's not a major issue, but it's when on some of the routes where we see services reduced beyond that. So if it's down at where there's 4 buses an hour and they suddenly go to 3 an hour, because then the issue comes that if one's missing for whatever reason, or a lot of the services across city, it then has such a major impact on the public. And then that's when the councillors start getting the doors knocked and people coming. So it's just looking and saying, can we sort of look and make sure that where we are planning on things, there are some very high frequency routes. I represent the Burley ward, which has the 120 route that comes through, that both major operators have the 120 service coming in, and at times you see so many services there, yet there are other parts of the ward where it's a less frequent service. And I understand the commercial impact on some of these, but it's just looking that you take consideration of the social need. I know it's very difficult to put that into your financial modelling that you have to do in reporting through, but you can take some estates where they are particularly, you know, it's a higher, an older age profile, and they find it very difficult to get down. The topography in Sheffield has great impacts on people, and where you can look on a map and say you are so many hundreds of meters to a bus stop, but if it's walking up a steep hill, it impacts on people. So it's how can you look at that about the frequency and not impacting on the services which have a lower frequency, whilst it's very difficult to sort of put the argument across about the high frequency services, the very high frequency services that seem to be every 8 minutes of both companies running across a route. I have another question as well, Chair, but I just put it, and it goes to the operators and to Matthew really as well there. It's with some of the changes that have been brought in around the city centre for social distancing and things like that, how are you finding things, particularly things like Pinston Street, or when Shalesmoor and changes and things coming around where they've gone in there? How are you finding the reaction from passengers to the changes to the routes that have been brought about? And is there anecdotal evidence that you can feed back in there that would help in understanding what passengers feel about some of these changes? Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Brian. Would like to answer?
Yes, I can take that one, Chair. And I suppose those of us who were around back in 1985 when the Transport Act that we currently work under was introduced, I remember being completely horrified when Mrs. Thatcher, or it might have been her minister, Nicholas Ridley at the time, said that the effect of the Transport Act will be to remove the social responsibility from bus operators entirely. And you think, yeah. And of course, we still work under that regulatory framework. But I think I'm sure Phil and John would echo this as well. It's a bit of a cliche, I dare say, but we get our job satisfaction out of expanding the operation rather than contracting it. So whatever we can do to maintain service in those parts where the level of demand simply doesn't justify the frequency that we see on the 120, we'll be up for. And I think it's critical that all of us keep close to this situation. And when we do have difficult choices to make, we consult with yourselves as the earliest possible opportunity so you can understand the thought process, what's behind it, and you may well have a better idea than we've had.
Thank you, Nigel.
Sorry, just to add to what Nigel has obviously said, yes, we are clearly a commercial operator, which then allows us to reinvest back into the services and vehicles, etc., as we were talking earlier on. Clearly a purely, as you may have described, sort of a social necessary service. There is a separate regime for that, which is obviously the tendered model. But I think this is going to be a hybrid, I think, to some extent through these changes. There is going to be, I think, continued funding for quite some time. Now, that's obviously going to be on a reducing scale, and we just need to make sure that we pull together the whole package about what is commercial, what funding is available, so that we can provide the best network possible, obviously for the residents of the Sheffield City. To answer your other point, if you don't mind, I'll get John to answer.
Sorry, can I just come back just on that? When I said about the social services, I understand about the tendered services. I was not making reference to those because I understand. So in the evenings where the services are tendered because it's not there, so the frequencies are based on the tender. It's looking at services that through the daytime. It's asking really that if you are shaving the frequencies, they're not done where they are infrequent during the daytime. It's more on these higher frequency services that brings them in line with, instead of from very high frequency to a high frequency, if you understand what I mean, rather than looking at areas where there aren't many buses in an hour and it's shaving off on the frequency of those and extending the time gap between them. That I understand about the tendered services. I wasn't sort of making reference to that. Sorry for the confusion there.
No, that's fine. And obviously, I can assure you that we don't operate a particular frequency of service because it's something we just want to do. We do that because of the demand is clearly there. One of the things that we've had to do throughout this whole process is put additional vehicles on the 120 because of the capacity that's available to us. It's the one service that actually needs more and more and more buses to carry the amount of people that are actually out there because they're not allowed to get onto all of the vehicles. So I do totally recognise there is a balance, and clearly we need to work with obviously Sheffield City Region and obviously South Yorkshire PTE to make sure that we get that balance correct. Again, very similar to Nigel, I don't want to see anything go at all in an ideal world. But at the same time, as a commercial operator, we do need to make some profit. And that would be quite pleasant during this current time, as we've made none this year. I can't see us making a huge amount next year either. And we're not talking extortionate numbers, but there is clearly a need for us as a commercial operator to make a small profit. That is a necessity. And as I say, Councillor Lodge, if you don't mind, I'll get John to answer the question with regards to the city centre changes. I know he's been directly involved in some of the communications with regards to that. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. And I think the city centre changes, we're very conscious that the city is evolving, and that is good to see. Nothing stays the same forever. And the city centre is moving. There's a lot more activity down around the Moor area. We have regular meetings through the Sheffield Bus Partnership with our partner operators and South Yorkshire PCA and Sheffield City Council. We work very closely with Matt. We have full, frank, genuinely open discussions about all manner of things, which is important under a partnership. Because we've all got, if we're being brutally honest, we've all got our own agendas to some degree, but we need to work together to see what we can do to between us provide the best service for customers. So Pinsent Street was mentioned as an example. We were quite concerned initially at the potential loss of Pinsent Street for buses and bus users. but we also recognise what the city are trying to do in terms of improving public realm. So there has to be a balance in some of this stuff. So I think, looking forward, so long as we can take our customers to where they need to be, and they don't have to walk too far, so long as the journey times are not impeded, so long as bus priority is improved, which is really important as the traffic levels start to grow again once more, then hopefully we can find a way through all of this stuff. If I could just comment on the 120 that Councillor Lodge mentioned, I do understand the point you make, Councillor Lodge. First of all, you mentioned both operators. So yes, the 120 is one of a handful of routes that are served by both First and Stagecoach, but that is in a coordinated way. It's not head-to-head competition, if you like, that you used to see back in 1986. It's coordinated and it's covered by something called a qualifying agreement, which basically makes it legal and to ensure that we're not anti-competitive. But it really is about supply and demand. And the more frequency you supply, the more attractive your service is, and the more likely you are to be able to grow and sustain the market. So even the sort of frequency reductions that we've talked about, they are things that we will probably need to look at, but they're not particularly things that we want to do. And who knows where we'll be in 2, 5, even 10 years' time. Hopefully with some of the changes that people are starting to talk about, then we might be in a different place, in a more positive place. And then the last thing I'd just like to say is that member engagement for me is absolutely key. So I really value this, and I know Matt has heard me say this before. Sadly, I think the last time I talked to a group of councillors in Sheffield like this was at a scrutiny committee after the November 2015 service changes. And, that cannot be right, that here we are 5 years later where there's been precious little engagement. And I, for one, and I'm sure my colleagues would agree, would welcome the opportunity for some more regular and coordinated dialogue for the benefit of all parties, to be fair. Thank you.
Thank you for that offer, John. You will now be added to our programme, I'm sure, and you'll be called in. You're probably sorry that you said that. Matthew, would you like to add?
Yes, I would. Thanks, Chair. Yeah, so John's picked up the point really well, and we have frank exchanges with each other because it's the way you make things better. I think we have a relationship where we can be honest with each other, and as a result of that, schemes change, opportunities are identified, and we work together to try and find the solution. And I wouldn't want that to change. And I think that's the way in which it works. I've always said consultation is not just a tick box exercise. I actually really value it, and that's, I think, where we start to get out some of the key principles of what we need to deliver, and where some of the the key issues lie in what we need to overcome. So in terms of the emergency active travel fund, because I think Councillor Lodge, that's what you were referring to, I'll start with Shales Moor. So Shales Moor, we did receive lots of comments on that. I don't think that's a surprise. There was a lot of comments, mainly from drivers, if I'm being completely honest. But we also got, and this is something which he kind of, never really happens, but we got some positive comments on that one as well. It was good. A large section of the community said, great, this is the sort of thing we want to be doing. Now, just to sort of make sure that everyone's aware of that, if that was a permanent scheme, we wouldn't have done it in that way. Obviously not, because it was a ring road and it's got a function as a ring road. But what it did demonstrate is that there's actually opportunities. People do want to use active travel on that corridor, just that's not necessarily the way you do it. So when we had stringent project controls in place, so when sort of bus journey times was one of the matrix we used, so when it hit that level of delay for bus services, then we review the scheme and decide whether it needs to come out or not. Now that happened at the weekend just before the bank holiday in August, when traffic levels were starting to rise to about 80% of their norm. Delay to bus services was starting to creep up as well. So at that point, the decision was then made to take that out. In terms of the city centre, Oh, sorry, I'll just go back to Shelsmoor. The reason why Shelsmoor was in was because it was a key corridor. A lot of buses use it. There was the capacity constraints. There was a good strategic need to provide that alternative route for people if they didn't have access to a car. It connected the Northern General Hospital. It had the Greater Green 2 scheme was just about to finish. The Penistone Road cycle route was there. So there's lots of reasons why it kind of lent itself to do something. Now, when we first designed the scheme, traffic levels were at 20%. And obviously the unlocking of the economy happened really, really quickly, a lot quicker than what we expected and what we were told. So obviously those project controls kicked in a lot sooner, and the scheme came off when that happened. In terms of the city centre then, this had a slightly different remit because this was more around social distancing. And the key section here was the bit at the bottom of Pinston Street. So near where, if anyone recalls, it's near where Superdrug is. So that section going down towards the top of the moor. There's because of the hoarding line for Heart of the City next to the new HSBC building, there is no pavement on that side. And with the street furniture, widths on that pavement were down to about 3 meters. In terms of social distancing being the main thoroughfare, there was just going to be too much interaction there. So the decision was made that we needed to widen that pedestrian thoroughfare, much like most cities. Manchester did the same, Newcastle did the same. And then because of that change, then obviously we couldn't get the downhill flow, and the buses had to relocate. We had to do that again very, very quickly. So we sort of had quick dialogue with the bus operators, with SYPTE, and as part of that scheme, it was about locking in some of the public transport priority. So where some of the bus services had to reroute, we've put in bus gates, which are enforced by camera, which again tries to make sure that we can maintain the journey time benefits, so the operational benefits, the punctuality, reliability, the journey time for some of the for the services crossing the city centre. And our analysis shows that journey time has increased across all the services compared to what they're running previous to COVID. The bus stop accessibility bit is the bit which is the concern, and that's the bit which honestly keeps me awake at night. That is the big bit to the bus user, which they will feel the most. Now, we've tried to mitigate that as much as possible by placing bus stops in the places where we need to get them, where people want to go to the most. But as John says, the city centre is indeed changing. The shift, the retail core is moving to some extent. Now at the moment we're at this tricky transition phase where some's at Fargate, some's at the moor. And that's something which obviously we're going to be wrestling with as that sort of transition matures itself. But I think in terms of the user feedback, just going back to the original question, Councillor Lodge, is the city centre has actually received a lot of positive comments, I don't know whether they're from bus users. We've had a few questions from bus users around, the accessibility really. Some's come from traders as well. But we have had, I can sit in the Peace Gardens and I can hear the birds singing and things like that. That's the sort of thing which you wouldn't really expect until someone actually comes out and tells you that. And traditionally through transport schemes, you never ever really get told that you've done a good thing. No one really turns around and say that's really good, that well done. But we have done in the city centre, and that I think that's taken us by surprise a little bit. But I can't determine whether they're bus users or not. But they're the sort of comments which are coming back.
Thank you, Matthew. Councillor Miskell.
Chair, Mr. Eggleton from First South Yorkshire, I think in his introduction, touched on the increased amount of antisocial behaviour directed towards buses, the drivers and passengers during the pandemic, which is really concerning given the importance of public transport in keeping our city running and getting key workers to their workplace. Members of the committee might be aware, but my ward of Arbourthorne is one of those areas currently facing an increased number of attacks on buses. And we're experiencing ongoing diversions due to this, causing quite considerable disruption to residents. And I'm really looking forward to meeting with Mr. Eggleton and South Yorkshire Police tomorrow to find a way through so that we can hopefully restart our bus services in parts of Arbourthorne. Now, from talking to fellow councillors in Rotherham, I understand that a similar antisocial behaviour problems and attacks on buses and their drivers have recently taken place in Ferrum in Rotherham. And as far as I can see, the situation in that area seems to have been significantly improved. Would Mr. Eggleton be able to tell the committee what can be learned from experiences in Ferrum and give the committee an idea on what sort of resources were allocated to fighting the issue in Rotherham, and particularly from the police, because COVID really has highlighted the importance of our public transport network, and we want to make sure that it continues to run regardless of where you live in Sheffield. And it would also be useful to hear from other bus operators whether they've experienced similar problems in antisocial behaviour during the pandemic.
Yes, certainly. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Miskell. Yeah, the Rotherham experience was very similar to that Councillor Cairn will probably remember up in Firth Park a number of weeks ago as well. Essentially, the success that we've had in both of them, and indeed Councillor Law, in both of them came about from us running what we call a Trojan bus through the area with police on board, and on both occasions they caught the little blighters. Simple as that. We had on one occasion a police car that went in front of the bus pelted with stones. We had one of our drivers shot at with an air gun pellet, and it was quite a sight seeing 3 police officers go herring off into the night and come back with 3 arrests being made. And that got rid of the problem almost overnight. Now, we did the same in Arbourthorne last week and didn't see a soul, unfortunately. That was disappointing. But we'll keep going. We appreciate entirely how important the service is to residents in that part of the world. One of the reporters from the Star said to me, but we've been speaking to some senior citizens who had to walk past the youngsters to get to the diverted bus service. And what have you got to say to that, Mr. Eggleton? Well, yeah, of course, but nor do we want our drivers and passengers under threat of what could be a severe injury if a brick goes through the window and hits you on the head. We don't want to go there. So we'll see where we get to tomorrow. I think South Yorkshire Police are doing their best with the resource that's available to them. But of course, we're ever so grateful for any pressure your good selves can point in the right direction to assist us to resolve that situation as quickly as possible. And the meeting with the developer tomorrow will be of great assistance, I suspect.
Yeah, just to clarify, we've had similar problems in exactly the same areas as the First have had, and we've worked together with First and the police so that it's coordinated decision and coordinated action from the operators. But clearly we need to consider first and foremost the safety of our staff and obviously customers on our vehicles. They will always come first. We'll take whatever action is appropriate at the time.
Thank you. Next question, Councillor Roper.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, panellists as well. I think, like people have said, we've had a really good service during the pandemic since March, and I've had comments where people have said it's been a better service than before, believe it or not. And I was wondering if either of you got any customer satisfaction index from sort of early this year to March and through the pandemic. That's one question. And secondly, I'd like to touch on the commercial services and tendered services. I represent a ward in the north where the 4 wards in the north actually cover 50% of the geographical area of Sheffield. Lots of rural areas and lots of rural isolation. So if we're going down the road where cuts will have to be made because of funding and 80% capacity on buses, so we've got a 20% reduction, will that mean that some of the more lucrative commercial services, maybe in the sort of semi-rural areas, and will they be the first to go? Because there are routes that are really viable and commercial, but there must be some routes on the margins and probably easy pickings to save money. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, okay, I'll answer this one, and then unfortunately I need to just step out for about 15-20 minutes, so John's going to take over. We don't have any specific sort of customer satisfaction survey that was done sort of through the pandemic period. Yes, but clearly the feedback we've had from social media is the buses have ran considerably more reliably than maybe they would have in the past from a punctuality point of view. And that's because obviously throughout quite a lot of this, there was much less cars on the road, which clearly helped. And obviously we did spend an awful lot of time cleaning our vehicles throughout this whole process as well. So I think the experience for the people that have travelled has been better. The challenge for us is to make sure that we carry that on as people return. And as I said earlier on, we have recruited additional staff as far as cleaners are concerned to make sure that we do carry that on even when the services do return back to normal, which hopefully they will. With regards to service levels and frequencies, and I think broadly we have covered most of this earlier on. Clearly, I honestly believe that most of these services will survive in one form or another, either commercial or with some form of funding. And it's just about getting that balance between the two. As an operator, this is it wasn't a very profitable business that we had before, to be perfectly honest with you. And so it's really just about trying to get that fine balance. We need to provide the right service level for the right area based on usage. But we're not going to make any significant changes without lots and lots and lots of consultation with yourselves, Sheffield City Region, and obviously South Yorkshire PTE, because that's clearly what we do anyway. And hopefully that'll give you some assurance. But if you can excuse me, John will step in and just answer any questions for the next 15-20 minutes, but I will be back.
Thanks, Phil. Nigel, do you want to add to that?
Echo Phil's comments. Really, we obviously monitor the number of comments we get from customers, and they have quite dramatically reduced. I think bus operators across the country for many years have said that our greatest challenge is that of congestion, and when the congestion disappears, albeit temporarily, we can provide a far better quality of service.
Thank you, Chair. Could I just say a big thank you to both the bus operators? Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you. And for all your staff, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Masters?
Thank you, Chair. A couple of points. You say there's going to be a reduction or likely reduction in service, likely reduction of usage. Now, I'm assuming because you're commercial operators, you'll be focusing more on the daytime services because you know you've got custom there, you've got people going to work, and also you've got people shopping. If you reduce the frequency of, the services to the outlying areas, and I'm not talking about sort of places, the rural areas, I'm actually talking about people off the main commercial routes. What you're doing is basically, I mean, to me as a councillor, I'm going to have a problem because people will drive to the main corridors, park up, and then drive in. Well, that's fine to a certain extent, but they also do that in the evenings because if they want to access what used to be the leisure facilities in, say, the centre, the theatres, the pubs, the clubs, and all the rest of it, there was no other way of getting into town and out again apart from driving up to a main corridor. In the past, of course, we used to have sort of late night services, frequent services throughout the evening, so you could actually sort of participate in lots of the leisure activities that you had there. Now, I'm hoping that looking forward, you'll actually be looking at how not only to support the sort of the daytime usage of buses, which would be mainly shopping and going to work, but also the evening and nighttime economy. And when you've got people like Uber, sort of where it's cheaper for two to actually phone up for a taxi to get sort of from town 3 miles out than to actually use a bus, even at 8 o'clock at night, then sort of basically it worries me that you've got a captured market which will provide you with the revenue you need to maintain the daytime services, but there's very little in the evening. And the other thing that worries me is sort of, I'm in a fairly affluent part of town. People can afford to pay the bus fares because it's cheaper than maybe parking in town. But I'm very conscious of the fact that sort of people are forced to isolate in other parts of towns where the income levels are quite low. And for a family to go out, it would be impossible by bus just to the swimming pool or sort of into town to sort of participate in an activity or go to a museum or something, because the fares are so high. And it worries me that sort of, yes, you're a commercial operation, but the fares, it sounds to me as the fares will be rising, and no account can be taken of people who really cannot afford the fares even now. It's cheaper for them to sort of run an old car and move as a family than try to actually pay the fares. I think that's the comment, sorry.
Okay, quite happy to take that one if I may, Chair. We have a dilemma to an extent with evening services, because if we contract evening services, and typically we're carrying somebody who's perhaps working at 2 p.m. till 10 p.m. shift, if we lose the evening service, we can't take that individual home, so we don't take them during the afternoon either. So that's always a dilemma we wrestle with. Now, I suppose it's worth for a moment going back to Pinston Street. If you consider in the evening, many families have a car available that they don't have available during the day. And we know that our main competitor is not Stagecoach or Hullies or any other operator, it's the private car. And the private car will always have the advantage at the home end of the journey. It's on the front path after all, and will take you wherever you want to go, whenever you want to go at a moment's notice. So therefore, we need the bus to have the advantage at the other end of the journey, in the city centre. And that means accessibility for bus, ideally to a greater extent than you can achieve with car. And that's a difficult balance to strike. Of course it is. But that's one of the ingredients, if that were to happen, that the economics of evening bus services will be better than they have been of late. And if we do see some growth in the evening economy, hopefully bus operation will benefit from that as well. Now, you might have picked up when I introduced myself, I also look after First operation in the Midlands, in Leicester in particular. In Leicester, we've had a great deal of success with family tickets. So at a weekend in Leicester, up to 5 people can travel for £5. Now, I'm not arguing that that's necessarily the right thing to do for Sheffield, but it's just an indication of the things we will need to consider as we go to attracting passengers back to bus. And I'm sure Stagecoach have got examples of doing that sort of thing across the country as well.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, we've got the very same. We've got a 5 for a £5 ticket, so any 5 people, doesn't need to be a family. It can be 5 adults, can travel for £5, and that's valid on Saturdays and Sundays and on Fridays after 5 o'clock. And that's pre-COVID, that was also very popular. And Nigel makes the absolute same point that I was going to make about evening services. It's not a black and white case, to be fair. And we actually do carry a lot of people around Sheffield and South Yorkshire generally that work shifts. So if the bus isn't there to take them back home at 10 o'clock, then they're not going to be travelling with us at 2 o'clock to get to work. And we're very conscious of that.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, that's all the questions at the minute for that part. I just want to say thank you for keeping the transport going and getting our key workers around the city during a lockdown, especially. I know hearing people from the NHS telling me things like that, you know, bus drivers got them there on time for their 5 o'clock shift and 6 o'clock shift and what have you, and it was much appreciated. And you kept our city going for that time, so I want to put that on record while we're talking. Phil did mention bus reform. Do you want to touch on that, Nigel or John? Or
I can say a few words about that. I think it's been well rehearsed, but we saw during the autumn the publication of the South Yorkshire Bus Review, which I think was a very realistic view of where we were as a city, as a region, pre-COVID. It didn't pull any punches, and rightly not. It gave a very realistic view of the recent financial performance of the bus operators and what had been done to improve that. And it's probably a frustration that COVID appeared and hasn't allowed the progress with the bus review ingredients and recommendations that we would have wished. But fingers crossed, in the not too distant future, that will happen. And we very much look forward to working with the city region and whatever becomes of the passenger transport executive into the future to give Sheffield the bus service it and its passengers deserve.
Thank you, Nigel. Do you want to add anything, John?
Just to say that the bus review clearly made a number of observations, and many of those are absolutely valid, and we will achieve the most for Sheffield by working together collectively to make things happen and to make things better, because none of us can work in a vacuum. We've all got our specialisms, but if we genuinely work together to sort of work through the issues and understand the challenges and recognise that maybe we can't all have everything that we want, that applies to all parties, and have grown up conversations about what the most logical compromise might be, and that takes time to develop that sort of real partnership and trust in people, and that's why I was disappointed, and I made the point before about it's 5 years since we've had a proper sit down and talk to councillors like this. And if we did that on a regular basis, we would get to know you better, you would get to know us better, we would all understand the challenges that we all face together, because as councillors you must have frustrations because you're supposed to be experts on everything, of course. We just have to be experts on running buses, so we've got it easy really, haven't we? But it's a plea really, let's try and get that working together a bit more sort of formalised, because I think that is the real key to all of this.
Thank you, John. We did have the bus review on our work programme, and then of course we had lockdown, so that didn't happen. We were expecting somebody from the city region today, but they haven't come along, so maybe the next time we can get somebody from there and from the passenger transport, and to get you as well, and keep this on the agenda and keep talking. Matthew, do you want to add anything to that?
I don't think, Chair. I don't think so, Chair. I think just one partnership working is going to be key with everything under the current situation. So, not really much to add.
Thank you. I was aware that Councillor Auckland wanted to make a comment. Do you still want to, Ian?
Oh, thank you, Chair. Well, I'm just going to be a tail end joining everyone else, but I did want to say that the transport operators, the staff, everybody's pulled together to maintain a service through COVID, and I think it's something to be very much admired. I think bus drivers particularly have a hard enough job getting around the city in normal times, and they've just faced an entirely different set of challenges as some of the traffic has melted away, but the day-to-day challenges of getting around and keeping your morale up, and presumably trying to put your own worries, personal worries, at the back of your mind, it can't have been easy. And this is coming from somebody who hasn't set foot in the town hall since lockdown began, and doesn't have to go into town, and is able to conduct most business online, although I do miss face-to-face meetings, particularly full council meetings, colleagues. I think they're well worthwhile when we're all face-to-face. It's just, I guess I was quite interested in these about getting together. Back in the day, we did used to have regular briefings. I mean, Palmer Horner of the PTE used to give us regular chats, and dare I make a plug for the old when we had community assemblies. But there's no reason why through the LAP partnerships, actually, that gives you an inroad to talk to local councillors. So that would be good. In terms of dialogue, I'm afraid for 19 of my 20 years on the council, I've had transport in my portfolio, and I am still going back to the franchise system. I think it's, particularly if you're going to ask us as politicians to give more than a nudge in the direction of me these days getting out of my car, and I didn't even pass my driving test till my late 40s. So never mind the general public, out of the car onto public transport more. It's just, to me, simple inclusiveness and accountability that at the end of the chain is somebody you elect or don't elect, and put across beside or don't put across beside. I hope I'm not turning to socialism, colleagues, but a good liberal approach is to regulate a market that's a natural monopoly. And, I think you are a natural monopoly, but there we go. Perhaps I better meet with you more frequently than almost never has, and you'll have to try and convert me. But well done in these circumstances.
Thank you, Councillor Auckland.
Yes.
Sorry, did somebody want to come in there? No. Councillor Lodge wants to make a comment.
Thanks, Chair. I did mention it before on asking questions. I was cheeky and got in there, but I think it would be good and I think it's only right as we as the committee that formally record our thanks to them and put it in there. And I saw nodding heads before, nodding heads now, and Councillor Smith was quite, thumbs up before and again now. So I hope that we can ask someone from our colleagues from the other parties to second that. But I think it would be great to put that out and ask that it's sent formally in writing to both First and Stagecoach, so that it can then be passed on to all the drivers and all the staff that are working for them. Because, I work for a rail company, and it's amazing. It's amazing how many key workers there are out there. Everybody's a key worker suddenly. But there are some real key workers that have been out there. The bus drivers, as you were saying, Councillor Fox, the bus drivers that have been going, and as Councillor Auckland said, not putting their own safety at risk, in effect, because they're out there and keeping the city moving, keeping people going to work, and really working throughout this. And they are sort of unsung heroes. Everybody looks at the NHS staff. It's quite clear the work that they were committed and doing there. But I think the bus drivers and all the employees within the bus companies do need that recognition as well. So I would like to suggest that we formally record our thanks, and we send it in writing to them, that can then be passed on and displayed in all the garages.
And I'd be glad to second that, of course, Brian.
Thank you.
And from the chair, indeed.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Auckland. Do we have a show of hands in agreement to that? We do. Thank you very much. Thank you, colleagues. I would just like to say thank you to John, Phil and Nigel and Matt for joining us today. And you're happy. I'm happy for you to go now, so you don't have to sit and listen to the rest of the agenda. So thank you very much.
If your bus is due,
yeah, thank you for those.
you get home.
Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you. All right.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Bye. Just going back to the agenda, colleagues, I realise that I missed item 5 out, public questions and petitions. It's probably because we didn't have any, but that I should have not missed it. Is that the case, Deborah?
Yeah, it's just simply a case of acknowledging that they're on tenant, Denise. That's all for the public. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. So we'll go on to item 7, which is the work programme. I've lost it off my screen. Deborah?
Hi, thanks, Chair. Yeah, I mean, there isn't a great deal of change to this. We bring it to every meeting, but it doesn't shift massively. I shuffled things around a little bit to accommodate the transport agenda for today. As the Chair pointed out during that discussion, we were supposed to have representatives from SYPTE and from Sheffield City Region present for the discussion today. Sheffield City Region sent their apologies. They couldn't field anybody. To be fair, it was, only a couple of weeks' notice, so it probably was a bit difficult. And also SYPTE did confirm they would be attending, did send me a name, and we have sent them a link for the meeting. But somewhere along the line, the chains obviously got broken because they haven't obviously logged into the meeting. So I'll follow that up and find out why that was the case. And the reason why I'm saying this is that you've obviously talked about maybe looking at the bus review that was chaired by Clive Betts in more detail in the future. It sounds very much, I did ask the bus providers and Matthew to provide you any kind of update that they could, which they have done, which seems to be it's all on hold because of the pandemic. So if you want, I can look to inviting those people back again towards the end of this work programme to see if there is any progress that can be reported. And I'd be happy to. You've also got, if you remember when you had the business recovery business plans, which were actually a call-in, you did ask for update on that as well later in the programme. So I could add that in and bring that if that's what members would like. But as things stand at the moment, we're looking to bring local plan to the January meeting.
Thank you, Deborah. Yeah, I think it would be good to put the bus review on the programme and the business recovery, of course. Councillor Miskell wanted to mention something.
Chair, I know that we discussed this at the last meeting, but many of us received a letter, which I think you responded back to from the chairman of Sheffield City Trust, David Gray. Many of us were unhappy with that letter, and we were very keen to take him up on the offer of meeting. Has there been any response to kind of our offer and to meet and to come before this committee alongside his chief executive and chief finance officer, ideally?
Not to me. Deborah, have you heard anything?
No, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the committee agreed that would be followed up via the working group on the Active Sheffield strategy that has been agreed, and I need to pick that up again. We're aiming to start that in January to get that review group moving in January. So I think that was the agreement. It would be picked up by that review group. But if members don't share that recollection and would prefer them to be invited to a meeting, then that can be arranged. That's fine.
I think my recollection. Sorry, Chair.
I was just going to say, we've got Sheffield City Trust on the agenda for later on in the year, next year. Is that correct? I haven't got it in front of me, sorry. I've lost it. It was on my iPad.
Sorry, Chair. No, at the moment, as things stands at the moment, you've got 3 meetings left of this year, and there's no provision for the City Trust to be brought back. But that's not to say if that's what members want, then I can do that. That's no problem.
It was my understanding, Chair, if you don't mind me just coming back on that, and other members may have things to say about it, that I think the general tone of the discussion was that there were a number of kind of questions and a number of kind of issues that needed to be discussed in a public forum. And I felt that that was something that was echoed by colleagues across the committee. And we do know that David Gray from Sheffield City Trust had made clear that he was quite willing to meet with committee members. We think, at least I think, and I think many of the committee share my view, that it would be good for that to happen in public as part of this meeting.
Thank you, Ben. Councillor Smith, you were indicating, is it on this point?
No, Chair, I've got a suggestion for the work programme, but it's different to this.
Well, I'll come back to you then. Yeah, I think that we, because he wrote to us all, it would be in our interests for him to come and meet all of us rather than just perhaps the work group. Clearly, he wants plenty of notice, I think, doesn't it? That was one of his gripes. So could we look at what have we got on in March?
Right, okay, so at the moment you've got mine's just gone off my screen as well. You've got, from memory, you've got the January one at the moment is scheduled for local plan. The February one, yeah, I've got it back now. The February one is waste, fly tipping and littering. And then the March one is the update that you requested on the business recovery stuff. So I could slot it into whichever one you prefer, really.
What does members think? Do you think that we could slot it in February with the waste, or see they're all likely to be long agendas, aren't they? John, you want to come in?
Yeah, sorry, Chair. Can I firstly, apologies from our side on the fact that we haven't got the minutes from the last meeting. I'm saying apologies. It's just simply too short time scale to get them finalised when we're meeting monthly. I've got the draft minutes in front of me, and on that issue that Councillor Miskel's just raised, I've got the wording that Councillor Fox stated that she was due to meet with officers in connection with the setting up of a task and finish group and would invite the trust to its first meeting.
Right.
So that's what you decided at the last meeting, yeah.
Which was which was my understanding of it, but it doesn't mean to say that you can't
have him still at the
yeah, absolutely.
Can I ask about the task and finish groups? That they don't take place in public, though, do they?
No.
They're not something.
No, they don't.
And I think there should be, a certain level of kind of public transparency on some of these things.
I think you're right. Yeah.
I think also, Chair, having had the meeting with the officers concerned regarding the task and finish group, it might be that the scope, it might not fit all that well with the scope of the task and finish group, because it's focusing very much on the strategy, isn't it?
Yeah, after meeting with them, yes, I do agree with you, Ben. I think that it wouldn't be ideal for them to come to that task and finish group. I did voice to the officers that we were not happy with his letters and to pass that on, and that the tone of the letters, I did ask them to pass that on, and they agreed to, which is maybe why he stopped sending us letters. So I voiced that, and I did say to them that we would be inviting him to a scrutiny board. So it's a case of, can we fit him in now, or should we move him on till it'll be May the next time? that we meet. Councillor Smith?
I have an alternative suggestion for the February meeting. I can put that now or later on if you want. Do it now?
Yes, please, because we're trying to decide what we can do.
We haven't had an update recently on the development work in the city centre, and I was just wondering whether either the January or perhaps the February meeting would be a good time to do that, because then we'll have or officers will have a better understanding of the impact of COVID on the vibrancy of the city centre. We know we've had a couple of major retailers fall into administration. I think it'd be good for this committee to review it early next year. That was my suggestion, Chair.
Yeah, does anybody else have any views? Councillor Turpin?
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to suggest that I think you might have said, or it may not have been in the committee when you said it, about inviting Mr. Gray and letting him choose which date is available, so to increase our chances of getting him in. And I agree with Ben and with you about that. It would be much better to have him in this public meeting than a smaller private meeting.
Yeah, I do remember saying that, didn't I? And asking him for some dates, yeah. Yeah, thank you for reminding me, Councillor Turpin. Councillor Auckland, you indicated you wanted to speak.
It's just basically to break out an agreement. I mean, I think Ben he's right. I mean, I think that the minutes about the task and finish. I think the task and finish task and finish is still a valid exercise. But I think I recollect saying myself that any one of us wouldn't want to take up. I doubt any one of us. Certainly, I wouldn't want to take up an offer of a side meeting or a private meeting or just a few members meeting in the circumstances of the correspondence we've exchanged and the information that we had, prior to actually the whole sad event of COVID and all the rest of it. So, and Councillor Turpin's idea to give him, well, when would it be, is good. And I particularly wanted to make the point, it wasn't so much that, it was also, the chief exec and the finance side of things. That's, I think, almost from shedding some light on the matter, that's possibly more important than the chair of the board. It's just his letter raises some really quite fundamental issues as well, separately to how the place has been managed on a day-to-day basis.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Maroof?
Yeah, I just wanted to agree with Councillor Ben Miskell as well, because I think basically what he's been saying in the letters, it gives him the opportunity in public to give his side of the story as well, rather than just writing to us and saying he doesn't quite agree with what we've said about it. And also what I would like, and I think Councillor Auckland and Councillor Miskell have touched on this, I think it needs all three of them, personally. And if and it gives them, as I said earlier, the opportunity to come and discuss it and say, this is where we went wrong, and this is where we went right, and this is why you were wrong. I'd like to be corrected.
Thank you. David Gray's role is chair. So we'd need to make sure that the chief exec was around as well to come along, because he's the guy that spends the money, I presume. David Gray is the chair of the trust. Councillor Richards, you wanted to come in?
Sorry, I was just going to say that if we're having this working group looking at the relationship with Civ, I'd rather that we got on with that rather than, if you like, try to have some sort of, it sounds like everybody's a bit cross, aren't they, with the chair and the chief exec. And I think that having a public slanging match again would have been no use. I'd much rather that we got on with our working party that was actually looking at what's happening and come up with something constructive and then have a discussion. You know, when everybody's a bit cross about stuff, it's the wrong time to actually have, if you like, a talk. It's far better for us to have calmed down a bit on both sides and then have some constructive stuff from the working party to bring forward to discuss.
Yes, yeah. That's why when I spoke with officers, I did say that we would be looking at how we can work and help the leisure industry as a whole, not just the leisure, the arts, the museum, everything, because we need the city vibrant again. So that was my suggestion to the officers, not just about Ponds Forge and things, yeah, about the theatres as well. So somebody else has indicated that they want to speak. No, yeah. Did somebody raise their hand?
Yeah,
Councillor
I did,
Burke?
Chair. Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just reacting to the suggestion that in February we have the business recovery or the city centre come to this committee. I think that's rather soon. If we actually look at it, it's about 6 working. It's about six working weeks, and I don't think. Yes, there has been a lot of COVID impact on traders and business recovery, but I think that's too soon to have a measured analysis. I think we're going, 6 weeks. I think we're better leaving that for a main item in next year's working programme, so that we can see the impact of the recovery, which we're hoping is going to start in spring, and we can have a really good piece of work about, we will know what's happening to the businesses that have gone into administration, and see what we can, if we can pick some bones out of it then. So it was just a reaction to that from earlier. I think that's too soon, but I agree with Sinead that I think, let's get the working party done and have something really constructive, because I think when you're looking at some of the good practice that we have to offset the city trust, I think that will make us feel a lot more positive when we help start rebuilding, ask pertinent questions and help start rebuilding the relationships. I think it's getting the task and finish group in the new year and looking at that and then fitting the dates in around there. Sorry, 2 bites of the cherry, but I've been indicated.
Thank you, Councillor Smith.
Yeah, I respect Diane's opinion. Everyone's got their. I happen to strongly disagree with it in a friendly way, Diane. It's the biggest single capital investment the city's ever made. We know that there are major changes going on in the high street. We know that at least a third of the unemployment and the forecast increase in unemployment is coming from the retail sector. I think it would be remiss of us if we didn't keep a close eye on that. I think what I would suggest is an update, not a single agenda item. But I really do think the scale of that and the importance of that for the city, we shouldn't leave it. That's my personal view.
Okay. Well, we could ask for an update report rather than getting, because we've got this waste management on the agenda, and I presume that officers will have been contacted and they'll have got it in the diary, and I'm a bit reluctant to take it off, once we've asked them to come along. However, we could ask for a report and an update for us to discuss as a committee. Because I'm conscious about when we have an item like we have now, it takes 2 hours, so we can't have a 4-hour meeting. But if we're in agreement, if the committee agrees, we could ask for an update from officers on the calling. Deborah, do you want to come in?
I think Councillor Richards wanted to say something.
Oh, sorry, Councillor. I know
No,
somebody were
okay.
waving at me.
Yeah, sorry. No, I can think of nothing nicer than a 4-hour Zoom meeting, obviously. I can see Martin is hugely agreeing with me there. I think an update would be useful, but bearing in mind that if we're talking practically, we know that COVID on the rise again in the country. There's going to be that break over Christmas where we all go and see everybody's granny. And then we suspect that after that, we're going to have another lockdown, because if it follows trends, as we've seen in Wales and other places, you know, things are going to be a bit grim. And I'm just not sure whether we ought to have an update a wee bit later, just because we may have had another lockdown and we don't know what will have happened. I'm not seeing any patterns for massive Christmas shopping or anything. I was in the city centre on Saturday, and you know, lots of elbow space, as it were. I'm just wondering whether it's too soon. I mean, Martin, come back and tell me what you think about that. I'm just thinking of the practical sort of things that we think are happening with COVID at the moment in terms of lockdowns and relaxations and things.
Okay, Councillor Miskell wants to just come in.
Sorry, Chair, mine was about the waste management item. So would it be appropriate to mention that now or not?
Yeah, that's fine.
It's just a quick clarification. If we're talking about waste management, are we also talking about the district heating system? Because I'm kind of quite aware that there have been a lot of issues with the district heating system, and it's a huge piece of kit for the city and extremely valuable. Do you think that that will be part of the waste management item?
I'm sure it would be, because we have got the title is I found it now. My work program is waste, fly tipping and littering. So waste management is the recycling centre, isn't it? So I'm sure when officers come, it will be included, Ben. Yes, that's just my opinion. Is that right, Deborah?
I think there's no right answer to that. I think it's a case of if members have a specific focus that they want to take out of that, I have plenty of time to scope that with the officers, so it can cover whatever you want it to cover, is the easy answer.
Can I reply to Jeanette?
Yes.
I agree. Under current circumstances, everything's important, and it's of the practicalities. Your suggestion, Chair, of maybe asking for an update report in February would seem to be a reasonable one under the circumstances. The environmental stuff about the fly tipping litter is important as well. We're in a situation where everything's important.
We're just running out of time, aren't we? Yes, Councillor Maroof.
Yeah, no, very, very quickly, just following on from what Councillor Smith has just said previously. I was in a Zoom meeting yesterday about the property industry across the country, and everybody is concerned about what the impact of retail is going to be. Everybody's affected by it across the country, and I think it's important that we take stock now rather than later on. So an update report, whatever it might be, is terribly important, I think, for February at least, because if we can take steps now to safeguard our position, then it's better to do that now than let us go into this further into this contract and have something negative at the end of it.
Okay.
Yeah,
Right.
could I suggest a potential compromise? At the moment on the work programme, we've got the update on the business recovery. So you could potentially, and also take on board comments about the timing of the city centre and the city centre development. You could potentially put them both on, if you're going for an update report on both, because I would imagine there's a lot of crossover between it actually. I mean, I seem to think that there was quite a lot of mention of the city centre development and obviously the recovery of the retail sector when we looked at the business recovery plans. So you could potentially combine them, and with them both being updates, and you would probably be able to get them in on one meeting. So that would leave the February one as it is, and then have the update on business recovery and on the city centre in March.
That sounds like a plan. Is anybody got any objections to that? We all happy? Good. Good. So it just leaves us to say that the last item is the date and time of the next meeting, which is, and I find mine, 19th of January at 4:30. So that just leaves me to say Merry Christmas and have a Happy New Year, and I'll see you all in January. Thank you. Bye.
Merry Christmas.
Bye.
Bye.
Merry Christmas, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Christmas,
Bye.
everybody.
Bye.
Take care.
Now and